Remember when I said this?
In North America, with 75 kilohertz deviation, an analog FM signal will occupy just over 150 kilohertz of bandwidth.
Imagine a sound wave form, like what you would see in Audacity after recording a voiceover. Got one? Cool. Now rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. This is how frequency modulation works. The instantaneous carrier frequency of an FM transmitter is directly proportional to the amplitude of the sound waves that modulate it. So, the louder the sound is, the wider the swing of the carrier wave. This is called deviation. In radio broadcasting, the amount of deviation we're allowed to have is limited. In the United States, it's 75 kilohertz. This means if our assigned center frequency is 95.7 megahertz, full scale when it comes to audio amplitude is between 95.625 and 95.775 megahertz. Anything louder will exceed this deviation, be clipped at the receiver, and the transmitter will overmodulate and potentially walk on either your own HD sidebands or worse, an adjacent FM station. How do you keep this from happening? Put an audio processor like this Omnia 9 right in front of your transmitter. It will adjust the audio levels so your spectral footprint is within limits. Good night, everyone. It's not as simple as turning the volume up or down and calling it a day. Most radio program content, whether it's music or the human voice, is dynamic, and not only that, it's dynamic in different frequency ranges. Modern FM audio processors are constantly at work to make sure they only pull back the parts of the content necessary. But there's another part to all this. Conversely, the processing will also boost the levels of sound frequency ranges that are so quiet they risk getting lost in the rest of the sound. The pulling back of loud sounds and boosting of quiet ones is called dynamic range compression, and it's the centerpiece of sound processing for broadcast radio, because it makes you, the listener, perceive the station as louder overall. Let's take a look at the process used on equipment like what we have. I tell people there aren't a lot of trade secrets in broadcast engineering, with the exception of anything having to do with ratings data and exactly how your audio processing is configured. With that said, I'm going to keep this rather basic as we're looking at equipment that is live on the air. The Omnia processors we use start off with an unprocessing core. Wait a minute, unprocessing? What the heck is this guy talking about? That's right, unprocessing. Have you ever heard of the loudness war? In the early 1990s, music started coming out of the mastering process increasingly already compressed. This, naturally, was at odds with some radio programmers who had perfected the sonic characteristics their stations were known for. People in the business have a term for this, and it's called signature sound. Over time, some audio processors for radio came with declipping and dynamic expansion capabilities to get the input as close as possible to what it sounded like in the recording studio. With this capability, we can work on a nearly pristine mix without a record label's heavy hand on it. The Omnia processors we use start off with an unprocessing core. This stage analyzes the incoming audio and does two things. It checks for peaks that have been clipped, like drum hits and cymbal crashes, and tries to restore them, and also expands the dynamic range of the audio. Now that we have more room for activities, we can start applying our own audio processing. A significant chunk of audio processing is literally just adjusting volume levels if you really want to ignore nuance. There are different names for this action depending on how fast it can go and how much effect it has on the audio signal. The speed at which audio compression processes run is expressed in two values, attack and release. Attack time is how long it takes for a compressor to reduce gain in response to signal levels going over a set threshold. Logically, release time is the opposite, how quickly the compressor increases gain after signal levels go below that threshold. These times are usually measured in milliseconds. Another value you'll see to describe audio processing is the ratio. This describes how much the gain is reduced over the attack time. For example, a 3-to-1 ratio means the input signal needs to go over the threshold by 3 dB for the output signal to exceed the threshold by 1 dB. Higher ratios mean harder compression. The slowest audio compression is called automatic gain control, or AGC. AGC is characterized by low ratio and long attack and release times. This means it doesn't really react very quickly to changes in the audio levels, but it will sort of turn down the volume if it gets too loud and turn it up if it gets too soft. The first stage of audio processing in radio is frequently a wideband AGC. In this context, wideband just means it works on the entire range of audible frequencies at once. This will help get the incoming audio to a baseline level so the later stages don't have to work so hard. Processing with somewhat higher ratios and shorter response times than AGC is called compression. If you turn a compressor's ratio all the way up to infinity to 1, that's called limiting. The infinity to 1 ratio means that any signal above the threshold gets reduced to the threshold with no increase in the output signal. The next step in basic FM audio processing is a multi-band compressor and limiter. Once again, all these processes do the exact same thing, but the name changes based on how fast that thing happens. This step splits the spectrum of audible frequencies into a number of bands, and this processing step is applied to each band individually. The signal threshold is set higher on the limiter, so it always takes over if a signal goes way over the threshold for the compression stage. On our processors, we have another wideband AGC after the multiband processing to target a loudness level in the post-processing stage, just because the signal can be changed so much from what came out of the input AGC. At this point, we're almost ready to send the processed audio to the transmitter, but it has to go through one more stage, and it's the most important step. If you take a limiter with an infinity to 1 ratio and turn its attack time all the way down to 0, you've created a clipper. If a signal goes past a clipper's threshold, it will instantaneously cut off the peak at that threshold. For those of us like me who have dabbled in audio before, you no doubt have heard that clipping always equals horrible distortion, right? Well, that's not always the case. In FM audio processing, the final clipper is set at the maximum modulation level to catch anything that gets past the AGCs and compressor limiter stages. Ideally, not much will trigger this final clipper, but it's there as your insurance policy to make sure you stay inside your allowable spectral footprint. From there, in a modern broadcast audio processor, the audio can be sent to analog balanced or AES-3 outputs, an internal stereo generator that creates an FM composite signal sent directly to the exciter, or both. Is there smoke coming out of your ears yet? I thought so. Audio processing is easily some of the most complex stuff in broadcasting, and being able to create and tune settings on these machines without making the final product sound horrible is almost literally an art form. Most people notice that their favorite songs sound differently on a radio broadcast than they do from a CD or a streaming service or a digital music store, but that's about the extent of it. Admittedly, I'm even a complete novice at the subject matter, and there's a chance that I got a few things wrong. And please, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I love more engagement. Speaking of engagement, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get more stuff like this from me. You can visit my landing page linked in the description or at airwavearchitect.com. I'll see you next time.